All right, hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining us live on TOC. I'm Sean Francis, and today we have a very special guest with us. We have Earnchick Bitcoin himself, Mr. Jeremy Tan, independent candidate from Mountbatten SMC. Now, before we jump into the interview, I do want to ask all of you to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're tuning in on YouTube, remember to hit that bell to be notified whenever we post new videos. And also, well, we've got a chance to ask Jeremy Tan all of the questions that you want to ask. So please, wherever you're viewing, go and leave us some comments, leave us some questions. We will have time to get to them right at the end of the program, right? So without further ado, right, Jeremy, thanks so much for being here. I guess the first question that I really want to ask is, why are you Earnchick Bitcoin? Where did that name come from?
Yeah, so thanks, Sean. You know, when you submit your ELD forms, you have to include a vernacular name. So Josephine Teo's real name isn't Josephine Teo. So you can include a name for yourself if you're not a Chinese candidate or a Malay candidate.
Yeah. What do you mean her real name?
So her real name is not Josephine Teo lah. It's a Chinese Chinese words lah. So you can include vernacular name. Yeah. So when I was registering my application to be nominated, I didn't have a Malay name. So I'm like, Earnchick Bitcoin sounds good. Yeah. So that's basically how I came about with it, right? Because and then also I thought that it's just a little, it's a good way to introduce to people about myself. There are not a lot of Malays in my constituency, actually, less than 5%.
Okay.
Yeah, so it didn't really matter too much per se. Yeah.
Right. Well, at least it's a memorable name.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about yourself then. Like, who are you as a person, a human being, a friend, a neighbor? Yeah.
Yeah, I think as a neighbor, I'm probably a very terrible one because I have 3 beagles. Oh. An auntie across the road, the condo across the road, Auntie Doreen, with the hair that is like that white color one. She called the AVS on me, suspecting that I might be harboring an illegal dog caretaking service.
Like a kennel, like a breeding kennel.
Yeah, you know, like the Platinum Dogs service that got shut down. Yeah, like basically she thought that was happening. So one day somebody came over and then knocked on my door. It's like, hey, your dogs are too noisy. So my logo is a dog.
Oh, okay.
Because when I applied for my candidate symbol to be a Bitcoin logo, ELD rejected. The reason being the symbol is too close to Bitcoin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you bootstrapped the business in NTU, which Unilever then acquired. So how did your entrepreneurial journey influence your approach to policy making or governance, and what kind of strengths has it given you?
Yeah, I want to bring people back to some history. When I first discovered how to do investments, it was from the backdrop of the failure of the Eurozone. So all the mortgage-backed collateral failures hit the Greece and all those. So that's when I first discovered Bitcoin, but did not buy. Okay. Unfortunately, I apologize to my wife. We are not billionaires because we didn't buy earlier. And then, I think if you remember, sometime 10 years ago when I heckled Han Hui at her rally, if you remember, there were always credit card promotions everywhere around MRTs, on the road. And that's when credit card rate interests were low. So how does that affect my approach to policies? I did realize that a lot of the business growth I was experiencing was really just free money floating around. I had so many customers that, they were working in Meta, AWS, Google. They were always my regular customers, and I just realized that I don't know when this will stop. And sometime in 2021, when I sold my company, thereafter, interest rates started to rise because inflation was too crazy. That kind of showed me that, well, I got lucky, but this whole time it was because of money printing and cheap credit. So that really influenced the way I thought about politics in general. Yeah.
Okay. So what then made you want to take that step, take that leap to get into politics?
I came from a very, I won't even say humble, terrible upbringing, financial upbringing. I had 2 parents that, were bankrupt, and there were times I was living in rental housing. There were times there were no electricity. in the home, no water, so I had to walk over to my cousin's house in Radin Mas to go and get a shower. I always thought the PAP was to blame when I was that poor.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I realized, okay, maybe some of it is my fault or bad decision making. And then as I get older, I also start to realize that maybe some of it is not the PAP's fault, but if the PAP hides that from you, then it is time to think about whether or not the solution is in legislation. Right? Yeah. So that's how I got in politics. Yeah.
Oh, so it's like from a young age you already
correct.
had that kind of inclination. Okay, interesting. Well, you've not only made the jump into politics, you've also made the jump into running as an independent, right? So can you tell us about why you made that choice, and also kind of like what was that conversation that you had with Mr. Pritam Singh? I know you kind of had a talk with him. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I always knew that my solutions were Bitcoin focused, so no political party would want to take that risk or slant with me. But I did consider that in the event that I do contest here or Workers' Party does send somebody to Mountbatten, I would have to at least try to be that candidate. So I approached him in the volunteer session. I said, Mr. Pritam Singh, I had already intentions to contest as an independent candidate in Mountbatten. I am here as a volunteer to see if I can change my mind. He says, nothing can change your mind. We don't want people running off to do their own thing after volunteering with the Workers' Party, which I wholly accept. But his branding as Workers' Party does not really quite resonate with the residents of Mountbatten because 27% of people live in HDBs, but 73% of people live in private property. Pro-worker policy may not be something very much keen to their heart. So I can understand him choosing not to field a candidate in the area that I reside, because it really doesn't make sense. And even more so for PSP or SDP, right? Their voter base will not be the same as my voter base. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Has it been challenging running as an independent? I mean, I'm just wondering about like the difficulty with finding assenters or seconders. I don't know if you're not holding rallies, so...
Oh, I actually am holding a rally tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Home of Athletics at the Mountbatten MRT, just by myself, and Daryl, the other independent candidate, will be there to meet his fans, but no speech because ELD doesn't allow for it. Just myself only.
Okay, very nice. So you do have rallies, but then, running alone, putting up the posters, finding assenters and seconders. I mean, what are the difficulties that you faced?
Actually, finding assenters was rather easy because if you live in the area, you just know friends that live in the area. As for what the independent candidate campaign means for me, I had set out with an intention to put a very high benchmark as to how an independent candidate should run his campaign. So from social media, doing podcasts, making sure I am proficient with vernacular interviews, going door to door, covering all the landlords, covering all the HDBs, covering all the condos, making sure that I spend for the rally, making sure that I spend for the flyers, the posters. We want to make sure that Singapore knows that it is not a thing that only GRCs work for people. You can have more SMCs. You can actually canvass and raise that money, and it's even not that much. When the election expenses get submitted, I'll be very transparent about it. But I think people can raise this amount and run a decent campaign. My goal is that all future elections, we start from this level and we go higher from there, because that's for Singapore.
Well, that ties in also to your general arguments for political reform, right? You're not a big fan of the GRC system.
Definitely not.
You want to see a lot more SMCs. Can you tell us a little bit more about your criticisms of the GRC system, as well as the broader political reforms that you'd like to see in Singapore?
I was very much well educated from Professor Kevin Tan's speech, on a podcast. I'm not sure if it's with you guys or not, but the general approach of having GRCs and the first past the post system, I think yourself and PJ, you guys have argued extensively against having a 60% vote share, but 90% of the seats. I think it's fair enough to say that if we go to 55% this election, does that mean that Lawrence Wong has a strong mandate? I would not say that it's a strong mandate. I would say it's a toss-up.
Yep.
Anything below 60 is really just a flip of a coin. It means that Singaporeans do not want to see the status quo anymore. They want to see change, right? So three-man GRCs are the maximum that I propose, and thereafter 80% to be SMCs, right? And they have to be geographically contiguous. They cannot be something like the Lapras shape of Marine Parade, Braddell Heights.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so, basically the stuff that even Joe, the TikToker, said, Prof. Kevin Tan said, and even yourself, right? Even yourself has debated against this. So, very much against GRCs. Remember the argument where Chan Chun Sing told Hazel Phua, oh, if you're so confident of yourself, why don't you step out and go into SMCs? There were many professors that spoke to her and be like, no, don't fall for his bait. Stay in the GRC, because if they're going to win big, you have to win big as well. Yep. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I think it's time that I just ask you this question, because there's no understanding you without understanding Bitcoin, right? I mean, it is like the cornerstone of so many of your policies, from housing to CPF. So let's just start off, I think, with the crux of your, let's say, faith in Bitcoin, that it's inflation proof. Is it really inflation proof? And how is that the case?
Yeah. So I won't bother your viewers and your loyal listeners to the exact specifics of it, because you can use ChatGPT and Perplexity to go and find out if I'm speaking the truth or not. So I encourage people to go do that. But it is inflation proof because there is no counterparty that can print it. How it moves in the short term, and the short term being 1 to 5 years, is something that you would concern yourself with. Absolutely must. But if we adopt it in a national level, with the institutions charging the way, leading the way forward, we'll be able to harness its volatility, and we will be able to actually profit from its volatility. Why is that so? Because when we know that CPF is a system, a 35-year-old pension savings system, when we put that money into Bitcoin and we lock it up, we know that the Singapore government, along with DBS, MAS, Temasek, can sell institutional grade instruments to make profit of its volatility while securing the investments made from the CPF. So that's my argument. But to go a step back, why did I propose Bitcoin? If we look at where the PAP is going with the HDB and the CPF, saying that the HDB is a retirement asset, I think the biggest failure is staring right in our eyes and staring right back at us in our face, but we are not acknowledging it. That is, healthcare is the second largest spending item on our budget. Why is that so? It is very simple. What is supposed to be compounding in your CPF has been compounded into your HDB, and therefore, people's savings for MediSave is inadequate. It is very clear that it is now a world we live in where 30-year incomes are no longer guaranteed, 60-year lifespans are no longer guaranteed, and people are living longer, so the healthcare has flipped all of the spending items to be the second largest. That is the biggest red flag for us. We know that people do not have enough in their CPF.
Absolutely. So I think that nobody would contest that there are serious, except maybe PAP, but I think generally speaking, nobody would really contest that there are severe reforms that need to be made to Singapore's housing, to Singapore's healthcare. I think what is tricky here is the proposal of Bitcoin as a way to rectify these systems, right? I'm just thinking about like in 2022 when Bitcoin crashed 50%, right? You know, you're looking at an asset with a huge amount of volatility. You know, imagine if Singapore had like a significant amount of its funds in Bitcoin. I mean, what happens in crisis time? What happens when the volatility of Bitcoin starts to work against us? You know, how do we deal with that?
For your readers and your viewers that are financially much more savvy, I think they would know that all of these volatilities and these crashes can be insured against, and the best way to insure against it is you could either sell a form. You could either at the very start, you could sell Bitcoin bonds, in which is a mix of fiat dollars and Bitcoin upside, insured by the government, so that people would have a particular interest rate that's higher than the SSBs, but also participate in Bitcoin upside. So that's one of the instruments. Another instrument would be to actually use futures to profit off Bitcoin's direction and have a delta neutral trade on Bitcoin while we clip income. And actually, that is the product in demand, and that's why SGX themselves have launched a Bitcoin futures contract for institutional investors here. All right. So the crash was in an era before we saw the rise of the Bitcoin ETF. Now, to your loyal readers and your viewers, if you like gold and you think that CPF should be investable in gold ETFs, which they are, then you must think of Bitcoin. Why? Because the Bitcoin ETF is bigger than the gold ETF. That tells you that smart money all over the world actually consider Bitcoin to be a safer and better store of other things amongst gold. So it is very likely they have Bitcoin and gold.
Okay.
And therefore, we live in an era now where institutional adoption has become more rampant. Nations are setting up their Bitcoin reserves. Nations like Bhutan are using their hydropower to mine Bitcoin to pay the salaries of the civil servants and also to buy food because they import all their food. Why do they do that? It is because the most hopeless are the most courageous. When they see that the system will not be able to help them, especially in a country like Bhutan where they do not have natural trade flows like us, like China's oil flowing through our ports, if they try to be really sovereign, they would have trouble because the SWIFT network, the US dollar network, has effective control over people in the world. Think of the example of the Russian invasion, right?
Yeah.
When that happened, what happens? The US froze the money in the SWIFT network belonging to Russian oligarchs. That type of dominance is something we as Singapore cannot be susceptible to. We must think independently and we must work independently to ensure that we have a future. And that's why I thought about Bitcoin. There are many political parties out there suggesting to remove the land cost as well as I have.
Yeah.
But it would be disingenuous for me to suggest that and not propose a solution. The solution cannot be to just take from the reserves and supplement any price shocks that we have in Singapore. So that is the way I've approached my policies. Saving policies, no spending policies.
Okay. So you advocate for building a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Correct.
And including Bitcoin as part of the Straits Times Index. I mean, what are the benefits of this proposal? You know, I think largely this election has been driven by one thing, which is cost of living, right? We're thinking about how can we redistribute resources to the most vulnerable in our communities? How can we alleviate the cost of living crisis, the inflation crisis that we're all living through? I mean, does Bitcoin, I mean, will Bitcoin help to alleviate this?
Yeah, let's focus on the cost of living issues, right? First, we buy all energy with US dollars. We buy all food from 70% of our food sources come from overseas, and we settle that either in ringgit or in US dollars, right? Sometimes it's yuan as well. So we buy, products from China, cauliflower and whatnot. So it means that we have a huge exposure to foreign currency issues. In the last FY, MAS lost $30 billion just trying to defend our dollar when we swap it to buy food. So just $30 billion loss, that's a historic loss on the MA side.
Yeah.
Why? It is because the US dollar is starting to shake. It's starting to show weaknesses. People want to address the cost of living issue, they must first address what we are using to buy food and energy cheaply, and that is the US dollar. As long as that has massive counterparty risk, it could be the Obama administration, it could be the Trump administration, it could be Biden administration. Singaporeans concern ourselves with one thing: we need to think for ourselves, as we have always done, right? So that is the first part of the cost of living issue. The second part of it is that if we stop thinking about land as a retirement asset in Singapore, as we move away from rent-seeking economy behavior, such as property agents trying to profit off $1 million HDB flats, $2 million HDB flats, in fact, then we'll have a good shot at thinking about how HDB prices its coffee shops, which people shop at, eat, and also the commercial and real estate amongst the neighborhood businesses, and therefore we can lower the price of rent. That is the one thing that we can do, because all of it belongs to the government anyway, right? There are no external market forces that can control that price. The government needs to rethink the way all of these commercial businesses, hawker centers gets priced, and we need to move forward as a country to go away from that Hong Kong style way of thinking. We are done with that era and we are moving forward. I use my platform to advocate for such a political change for that reason. Yep.
So just now you mentioned the amount of money that Singapore lost trying to defend the currency, right? And obviously that's not a good thing, but there are advantages, right, to having monetary policy. When inflation goes up, right, you can start to tighten the interest rates, right? You can print money as you see fit, right? There are ways to kind of control inflation with monetary policy. I mean, this is something that you don't get with cryptocurrencies, right?
Correct.
So I think that's kind of a big worry that I have. Yes, monetary policy often draws a lot of flack from financial analysts and economists, but it is kind of a strength still that Bitcoin doesn't have. How would you address that?
So if you want to trade and you want to facilitate commerce, you need price stability. But if you want to save in something and know that in the long run that you are saving in something finite, you need quantity stability. Bitcoin offers quantity stability. It is not printable, it is finite, it is powered by 50,000 nodes, extra hashes of mining. And what we want as Singapore is a future whereby we have gold in our reserves, $500 billion worth of gold and foreign currencies in our reserve, Bitcoin in our reserves, undisclosed amounts and disclosed amounts. And we also want to have other currencies for trade, like the yuan, the ringgit, and also Bruneian oil to back a dollar. So having a basket like that would give us a very, very much stronger dollar, firstly. And also having an SGD Bitcoin ETF would mean that we draw out Singapore liquidity into long-term savings so that inflation gets easier. The more Singapore dollars that are floating around in terms of vouchers and all these little tricks and treats that they give during the election will only stimulate inflation. That's happened during the Biden administration. It's very clear now that it will happen to us. It is not a panacea, it is just a band-aid, correct? So when we approach the future going forward, we also must look into what AI is going to do. Robots are starting to talk to each other. AI is starting to talk to each other. The future of commerce would be AI transacting with each other. They will not transact in fiat currency. They will transact in Bitcoin. Not other cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin. And that's where we need to position ourselves properly to ensure that Singapore is not left out, hoping and begging that the US dollar is as pristine or as legitimate as it used to be honored in this part of the world, the global south.
So, I mean, you're talking about like the US dollar, you're talking about the Biden administration, right? I mean, the Biden administration was a little bit more hostile to cryptocurrencies than the current Trump administration, right? I mean, what might happen if the next administration comes in and then says, no, we don't like crypto, we're going to regulate it into the ground. The US is still the world's biggest economy. I mean, we're going to be hit really hard, right? And that's all just to say that there's still a lot of regulatory uncertainty, not just in the US, but all around the world. Right? Is that something you're concerned about?
So if we look at where people act, policy of deeds and not the policy of words, 40% of the mining pools in Bitcoin are American, 40% in China, the rest all over the world. Japan has a huge stake. The regulatory capture that they are able to enact after the Trump administration is starting to look like the window will close. It is starting to look like other countries have caught on, and also because legislation tends to spawn other similar legislation. A bill in its infancy in the US will provide a good skeletal framework for something to be done in Canada, in the UK, even in Singapore. So why do we have a good window now? It is because we have a very pro crypto president in Trump But let's not forget why this is so. It is existential to a American culture to keep buying goods, purchasing more. They have brands, celebrities, sponsorships, wasteful spending. The test of any American president would be the one that supports this spending culture the best. So it must follow that printing will continue. It must follow that the debasement of the US dollar will continue. What Trump is doing to the US dollar is to retire all of the debt interest to all the countries that he has tariffed, get them to accept that interest rate. And when we see these kinds of things, then we have the situation whereby Gan Kim Yong has to go and back Lutnick and Besant for a favorable trade deal. So we want to have our own insurance policy as well. And so far I've not heard anything credible from the government that we have an insurance policy of sorts. Yep.
Well, US aside, we do have a little bit of maybe a test case, right, in El Salvador. Right?
Yes.
And I think now looking at El Salvador, with its widespread, with the big policy change and demands for Bitcoin, right? I mean, we're looking at it now in retrospect. We're looking at poor public adoption rate, a lot of caution and skepticism from the IMF and investors, and it doesn't really seem like there's a whole bunch of real growth, right, that El Salvador has seen. So, I mean, that doesn't seem to be a case study in your favor, though.
Yeah. El Salvador is not a representation of freedom from the American system. El Salvador is really working with the Trump administration. What they're doing, the MS-13 gangs, they're really just working within the confines of that system. But for friends who visited El Salvador and Argentina and Peru, they will know that inflation is still very rampant, right? Bitcoin and US dollars are the de facto commerce currencies on the ground for those South American countries, Egypt, and even in the recent junta oppression in Myanmar, the political refugees and the resistance accepted Bitcoin to support their resistance. So the thing is that El Salvador is having more Bitcoin to support itself, but that itself is not a representation that they intend to rally against American control. Let's face it, IMF, World Bank, it's either one is a European control, one is American control. It has always been that way, right? So El Salvador is not here to say that we want to break free from the American system or that. It just wants to play nice, but also profit and have a insurance from it. Just like Japan, SoftBank is starting to buy more Bitcoin. After decades of destroying its own exporting capacity, Japan has finally decided to hedge against its counterpart in America by buying Bitcoin. So the people who work with America are starting to think, look, you may be here the next 4 years, 5 years, but we want to be here 1,000 years, right?
Okay, so I really agree with your point there, right, about US hegemony, US control, and European control. You're caught between two bad places here, right? I mean, how then do you think Singapore is positioned right, to adopt Bitcoin? How is it positioned in relation, right, to the EU, the IMF, and the US? And perhaps how do you see, or what do you want Singapore to be going forward in the global financial market?
So we are the 4th largest financial hub in the world, and we are the largest oil trading hub in Asia. Because of that, we have a lot of US dollar transactions here, right? The key thing in any of my policy is to actually get institutional investors to take on our risk when we guarantee Singaporeans their CPF that is invested into Bitcoin. We have about $189 billion in our CPF right now. So we need to hedge against the probability that $20 billion or 20% of that, perhaps maybe about $45 billion gets invested in Bitcoin, right? So while we worry about the downside, don't forget that Bitcoin presents massive upside. If we need to hedge out $45 to $50 billion in our CPF for Bitcoin, think about this. MAS just lost $30 billion defending against inflation with no upside. So what institutional investors and banks can do is to actually sell convertible bonds, preferred notes, create institutional products that lock your Bitcoin, and in exchange, we guarantee certain things. I give you a retail example, very simple retail example. A product that I mentioned over the last few days to people is, what if you could buy Bitcoin on your Moomoo or your Tiger account and you lock it? And for that, Moomoo or Tiger offers you margin to buy safe ETFs, like the STI ETF, like the Vanguard ETF. Very practical, clean, simple solutions. Or a Bitcoin SGD bond. They give you a return of perhaps 3 to 4%, higher than the current 2.67%, with certain Bitcoin upside, but fully guaranteed. So 85% Sing dollars, 15% Bitcoin, right? So we make use of the volatility as a feature, not as a bug. Yeah, and because your viewers are very well educated, I believe that they can do their research on their own to see if I'm, saying this, or is it already well thought out in legislation all around the world. Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe to come back to something that voters are really, really concerned about this election cycle, right? I mean, I think that one of the thoughts that voters or viewers might have, right, isn't it more a problem of redistribution of wealth rather than generating more wealth with Bitcoin? I mean, shouldn't the priority be on redistribution? So,
to my residents in Mountbatten, they pay the highest amounts of tax. Property tax, they have cars, they have more than one property, they spend, buying one bag in Ion for them would pay the GST of one entire HDB block, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so the redistribution of that wealth has to be done through GST. I unfortunately have to disagree with certain political parties asking for 5% GST. And the reason I say this is because it seems that the Lawrence Wong administration has not been able to replenish the reserves that was taken out for COVID. It tells me then that they are not running, or rather he tells the world that they are not running or not planning to run structural surpluses anymore in the budget, which means that going forward, they are very worried about having enough, not just us, right? So you talk about the redistribution of wealth. You can only redistribute wealth so much before you eventually reach a situation whereby every segment of society believes they are entitled to more redistribution. Lee Kuan Yew once said, every generation should pay for itself. I don't think this political administration is really sticking to help achieve that goal, right? And I believe that Singaporeans, if we are doing well, there really isn't such a need to go and redistribute the wealth per se, right? People, the 2010s and 2000s, people were largely very content with their lives. But in since the 2020s up to today, it's becoming a bit painful. Yeah, we no longer accept this black box decision making by the current administration.
So you'd keep GST at the current 9% rate?
I will keep GST at current 9% rate and remove some of the parliamentarians. That's what I'm thinking about.
Okay.
Because I would say that the PAP is the best system in the world in terms of knowing what to spend money on, right? They have the PA network, they have the RC, they have the Ciyan, the Taihua Guan. How do they know not how to spend money? They are the best at spending money, right? The question is whether or not an opposition party comes in and says, I'm better at spending money than you. I don't think it's such a worthwhile argument to say spend in like minimum wage or anything like that, because if it was so politically juicy and easy, the PAP would take that position first instead of you waiting for you to take the position.
So what might you say, I think, to the opposition, right? I mean, now a lot of opposition parties are calling for a massive reduction in the GST, right? And then to kind of supplement that, instituting things like a wealth tax. I mean, what's wrong with that system?
I don't think that we should have a system that penalizes wealth. I think that we need to have a system that considers what we treat as wealth. The problem right now is that we have this assumption that the next generation will hold our bags. The next generation will buy our expensive houses. That is only premised on your income being less than the next generation. But what if income stagnate and AI takes our jobs? then it becomes a problem where the next generation really cannot become freeholders of wealth, asset holders. As long as you hold a HDB, in my books, it's a lease and it's not a freehold asset. It is a lease. And approaching it from a standpoint of wealth tax, sure, you could argue even the COEs is a form of wealth tax. It's a form of luxury tax. Well, luxury tax, wealth tax, all of these things all go hand in hand. I think the wealth tax should not be seen in the lens of just the way the Americans see it, or even perhaps Norway or whatnot. We must be practical. We must use policies that actually tax tax and transfer. And I do think the GST should be kept at 9%. I don't think there should be changes. But I do advocate that the people managing the GST to be changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked about, you mentioned AI a little bit just now, right? And so you've emphasized the need to embrace AI and robotics, right? I mean, is Singapore not doing enough in this area? Because I'm thinking about like, let's say PAIR or GovTech, right? Singapore does seem like a pretty technologically advanced country. I mean, where do you think that we are lagging behind? And what do you think we can do to combat that?
I in my free time recently, I taught a AI workshop class for the Mount Faber Leisure Group. And at the end of the class, I asked them, which one of you fear that AI will take your job? And nobody raised their hands. That was shocking to me because everything I saw that they were doing.
I'm quite shocked. But
I believe the AI will take your job, but the AI doesn't take your job. AI takes your industry. So for example, AI will take your industry in the form of hospitality management. One solution provided by a big company that has a lot of AI features inside is sold as a package to another company, like a resort, right? Or even like the Mount Faber Leisure Group, right? And when that happens, you'll suddenly see displacements from all the roles, HR, retail, operations on the ground, because they have robots on that. So when people look at their daily work, they think, this can't be replaced. Only I will know the data. The thing is that you could replace the entire chain, and I think that's the worry we have. I don't think we're doing enough because it is quite obvious now that we still have this idea of having, the national exams, and none of it really lets you use AI. Let's be real. When you are solving problems when you're an adult, you use AI all the time. You're doing your research using Gemini, you're doing your coding using Cursor, you're doing some simple question and answers using Grok. But why is it that in our exams we are still using pen and paper for things that AI can answer immediately? Where exactly is the direction that we're doing with this? China has introduced AI classes at primary school. Why? Because they recognize better we equip you with some AI skills than let you to go and fight against AI later. That's as simple as that. Tell me, man, your readers and your viewers are very intelligent. Why do we still test people with pen and paper and expecting them to regurgitate everything from the brain? It makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay, I can kind of get behind that. Right. Now, tell us a little bit more about your housing policy, right? So you've criticized using HDB as retirement assets, and you refer to them as generational Ponzi schemes. Right?
I refer to them as actually I was offered some legal advice that might be profitable.
Okay.
So I changed it to don't let it become a generational Ponzi. Instead of it is a generational Ponzi. Yeah. So
but what's your model for addressing the housing crisis? Of course, it's something that's near and dear. It's part of a lot of party manifestos. I mean, what's your platform?
So the moment you stop allowing HDB costs to be, or rather, the moment you start disclosing land costs, then you have an honest and open discussion about how to reduce the land costs. Right? How do we apply grants in certain sectors? How do we give grants to build in certain sectors that would continue to preserve land values in certain places that are important, right? But without district to district level data, we cannot have that discussion at all. But once we know the areas that might suffer, pricing problems, we want to be able to slowly, but gradually, not slowly, but systematically reduce those land costs and not let the market try to front run those decisions by either buying or selling those lands before decisions are made, which is why HDB policies every time today enforced means today enforced. No, people cannot speculate on it tomorrow. Then from there we go on to commercial real estate owned by the HDB. And we have to, as a country, shift to a mindset of era of asset enhancement is over. There's no such thing. We discovered it's a mistake and we are going forward that it's a mistake. It's okay to accept that it's a mistake, right? I give you an example. Goh Keng Swee secretly moved away from the sterling pound in 1967 to the formerly gold-backed US dollar. Okay? Lee Kuan Yew said, because Lee Kuan Yew was given a very angry letter by the British Commissioner, why you go to US dollar and never tell me, Then Lee Kuan Yew said, it matters what you issue has backing or not, correct? And it seems like we're at that point in time whereby we're starting to realize, okay, certain parts of the US dollar is breaking, it's time for us to move forward. The HDB problem that we are facing, once you pluck it out and you start to have an idea of HDB is not a retirement asset, people will start taking their money and considering where to put. The boomers are flush with cash that they cannot transfer, assets also, that they cannot transfer to their children until they die. And it does look like they'll die in maybe 20 years. We cannot wait 20 years to solve this problem, right? Because in the meantime, what do? 99-year condo show flat, what do? Give money to their children go and push the prices. Emerald of Katong, where I contesting, we had 4,000 checks for 800 units. Average PSF was like something like 3,000 PSF. How do these people have money? It's the parents giving them money. We need to stop thinking about housing as a retirement asset. It's just killing the future generation.
Fully agree there. Well, housing is not the only thing that you want to overhaul, right? The CPF
Correct.
is also another thing that you want to propose a lot of different reforms for. So can you tell us specifically what you plan to change and what specifically are the issues that you see with the current CPF model?
Yeah, the current CPF model is entirely based on a returns that you're supposed to enjoy 2.5% in your OA and 4% in your SA and then your MA as well, right? 6%. So, firstly, that floor rate is not steady. We have dipped below that floor rate of 2.5% over the last 20 years, the effective floor rate. Secondly, as long as you keep raising the basic retirement sum, the ERS and the FRS as well, it means that you are dragging people's retirement out. And when you raise the retirement age, you are dragging people's retirement out. But why is that so? It simply means that the paternalistic system is not doing what it's supposed to do. It is supposed to pay you out at a certain age, but now they're stretching the confines of what they can do. This is very simply human risk. You trust that a few humans can manage your retirement, they're not doing it well. GIC gets a 3.9% inflation adjusted return. Do people feel that they get a 3.9% inflation adjusted return? No. It must translate. Otherwise, we reject the idea that PAP is a black box, do whatever you want, blank check. We reject the idea that we should continue voting for this. We used to vote for this because things were going well, right? But now we are deciding, no, maybe let's look at the options. And I think that's what independents are there to pressure the government for. Policies that are inconvenient for any party to talk about.
Actually, yeah, that's a very good point you have there. Yeah. So another very interesting policy that you've proposed is a population reduction strategy. You want us to hit 5 million, a population of 5 million by 2040.
Yep.
What inspired this? What inspired this idea, and why do you think it's important for us?
So, in the words of Philip Yeo, the PAP government has given up on trying to grow or the brightest brains of Singaporeans. The 500k PR scheme is really an O-level, an A-level test for the best Southeast Asian scholars to come, right? The EDB goes out there and, by his words, kidnap the best, smartest 15-year-olds, give them scholarships and make them acclimatize to Singaporean life. And this has worked for us in terms of, getting PMET ranks for a long time. But we are now having the highest amount of PMET retrenchment since 1988, since the stat was first recorded. And we are seeing a huge amount of labor in construction, in domestic work like maids, and in port and shipyard work. Those will be very prone to humanoid disruption. And I'm not talking about 5 years from now. I'm talking about 10, 15 years from now, something like, if we model out that $80 trillion of work in the world is physical labor, then it kind of approximates that we will lose about 500, 800,000 jobs here because of physical labor jobs. So we must be very careful to think about population growth when we know that AI and robots are here already. We cannot be so late. The people loves to wait for other people to do things. And by the time everybody does things, we are late. And they think that they can execute fast because they are small, but it doesn't seem that way. So I advocate for that change because the $18 trillion market of human labor approximates that we will lose about 500 to 800,000 jobs here.
Okay. Well, last question from me before we move on to the live questions. And also PJ's questions.
Oh, okay.
He's sent some in. Are you here for the long haul? You know, are you going to continue contesting in the next election? Are you going to keep walking the ground in the next 5 years? I mean, what is the longevity of the Jeremy Tan brand?
Firstly, the Jeremy Tan brand is only used to enhance the quality of life of my constituents. I've seen a lot of volunteers step up in Mountbatten and outside Mountbatten to come over and help Mountbatten because they believe that this is something worth fighting for. In the future, it might translate to me holding more fundraisers, galas, and events for my residents, so they don't have to pay. They, some of the HDBs I visited, door no lock, some no door, because they're scared they might die inside. It is that sad. Some have chains. It is that sad. Then on the other hand, I go to the landed side, the lawn, the guy plucking the coconut from the trees inside his lawn, his yard. So it's a wide world, right? But let me tell you this, I will stand as long as Mountbatten is drawn back to the same shape. If Mountbatten gets absorbed into Marine Parade Heights or something else, or maybe they throw out MacPherson again, who knows, right? Then I say I want to be back, new one, maybe they get Pikachu, they put another tail somewhere or whatever. So I need the 52%, not 51, because above 2% can trigger recount. I need at least above 52% to ensure that I build my base. Right? Otherwise, Mountbatten residents may be the last time voting as Mountbatten residents. Right? Don't ever say never. I kept quiet for a while because I knew the redrawing might be serious in an election where there's so many opposition contesting everywhere, right? So yeah, I will be back. But if you really force me to go and fight in Marine Parade Heights or Marine Parade, whatever it is in the future, maybe it's, who knows what it's going to call, Marine Parade Sentosa maybe even, right? Yeah, let's do it. Just don't go and redraw my Mountbatten because that will force me to go and do this GRC. Yeah.
Okay, very nice. All right, let's move on to some questions. I think PJ was very, very keen to ask you this, right?
Sure.
So he's responding to a comment that you made on Rishi's podcast, right?
Yeah.
Arguing that the US exploits the dollar to its own advantage, okay? And so he says, well, we all know this, right? And the US has, of course, exploited its dollar since Bretton Woods, right? But the thing is that you yourself note that there is no other country that can serve as an alternative, right? And even China doesn't want to be a reserve currency. Right? So you say that Bitcoin should be taken up because it's politically neutral, right? But the problem here is that Bitcoin is volatile, it has huge fluctuation, it is not transparent, it is unaccountable, right? Rich people go to Bitcoin precisely because it's untraceable, and governments, on the other hand, should be transparent, accountable, and traceable. Bitcoin is none of those things. So how would you respond to that?
So let's just face the facts. The world has transacted more laundering via the Panama Papers in US dollars than Bitcoin. In fact, Bitcoin is very traceable if you implement it well, and because the transactions are clear. Even right now with MicroStrategy, the Marathon, all of the digital token holding companies and miners in America, you can see their transactions very clear. You can see what they're buying and what they're not buying. Of course, you can move it off wallet, but then that would be off-chain. But then that would be a situation whereby the traceability is something even the US dollar cannot solve. Right? The US dollar has just been the medium of the most amount of traffic money in the world. I think that's the first step to that. I've already explained how Bitcoin volatility can be harnessed, and I encourage your viewers for the sake of time, to actually go and use AI, ChatGPT, Perplexity to find out how countries and institutions are monetizing volatility. They are hedging out Bitcoin volatility. And as Bitcoin hash rates improves and the halving every 4 years happens, and also with the fees getting more because people transact and use Bitcoin, Bitcoin will eventually go past correlating with just inflation. It will become its own land, and it will become its own way of life. People will use it in different ways, right? There are different models that project this. Some of it call it the stock to flow, some call it Plan C, some of it call it the power law. Anything with a hash rate and a finite supply that halves every 4 years would have some form of a power law. So that is something very important to take note about Bitcoin. I want your viewers to really go ahead and use AI to find out where I'm wrong and where I'm right, because then it won't be like trust me bro, it's just correct. Yeah.
I like that attitude. Okay. So one more question before we get to the live questions, and also just a reminder to everybody viewing that you can go ahead and put your live questions and we will get a chance to go and ask Jeremy your questions, all right? So, so again, another question here we have, the problem with Singapore right now is unfair wages, right? People are underpaid. So why should people care about a reserve currency when the real problem is too much hot capital flooding in, too much foreign dominance in our economy, and not enough support for entrepreneurism and SMEs?
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, you talk about hot capital or not, it was really, really difficult at the start of my business, my entrepreneurial career, trying to hire good people because there was so much hot capital going to the Mac 7 companies and subsequently all the smaller tech firms, such that I really had to double down in my skills in finding good people, and also I had to work extra hard to convince them to work for me. So, you know, this question is right. If we have so much hot money coming in, wouldn't it dampen our ability to conduct business? Being a first-hand recipient of the effects, I can say it was very real, right? I was only a distributor of consumer packaged brand goods, but I had to pay the salaries of tech firms in order to get competitive talent. And everybody back then was trying to interview for the Cloudflares of the world, the Datadogs, the Palantirs, the Snowflakes, and I could really not compete, and it made it so hard for me to really work, you know, to get the outcome I wanted. So yes, this problem is unfair wages. But the next question is, how do we actually translate that into making sure that Singaporeans receive those wages? I proposed in my writings that we need to have a train to replace program. You give an incentive for companies that list out, you know, a bunch of characteristics of current foreigner working there, and you make them accept incentives when they train and replace those foreign workers with Singaporeans. The second thing I propose is that you get 1 EP for every Singaporean you pay 100,000, right, to enhance the campus framework. Why is that so? Because sometimes the Singaporeans are just sitting around 80, 90K and they just never can go up. You want to raise their wages? Okay, let's bump him up. Then now we have a cost-benefit analysis on how talent really is priced on your balance sheet. Then we can go forward and start to think, where is the unfair wages? How do we increase the wages? Because the government will support wage increment all the time, right? And that's the way I approach it. I don't like for things to be, you know, particularly outside the free market, right? I want to stretch the free market as far as I can. Then we go to incentivizations. Yep.
Okay. All right, let's turn now to some of the live questions that are coming in. Yeah. So just a reminder, we still have about 10 minutes, so time's very tight, but we still have time to ask Jeremy all of the questions that you are dying to hear. Right? So we have here Kramer from YouTube asking, will Jeremy declare his assets like Bitcoin if he wins for transparency, ethics, and conflict of interest issues? Will you?
What would be the conflict of interest? I'm not exactly sure. Because
okay, I think the idea might be that you're trying to pump your own bag here. You know?
Yeah, Bitcoin is a $2 trillion market. Okay, if I'm able to move it with my candidacy, imagine what Singapore could do. So no, I'm not able to pump the Bitcoin market at all. And I don't care about anything other than Bitcoin. Okay. I was very specific from the very start. I only care about Bitcoin. In terms of asset declaration, sure, if every MP has to declare, then let's go for it.
Okay, but what about Bitcoin at the very least?
Yeah, I have only 6 Bitcoin right now, but I have shares in Strategy, which is a Bitcoin holding investment company. Yeah, so that would take it to more than just 6 Bitcoin. Let's put it this way. Like once again, you want me to declare? Sure, all MPs declare. Let's do it together.
Okay,
yeah,
nice.
Yeah, right,
I would be very much for that.
Yeah.
All right, next question also coming in from Kramer on YouTube. He says, if I invest CPF in Bitcoin, or if CPF is invested in Bitcoin, right? What if quantum computing and AI break Bitcoin, right? Technology eventually becomes obsolete always.
There is a $2 trillion bounty right now for you to break Bitcoin. I'm very sure Google, IBM, Microsoft is trying to do that.
Yeah, but what if it does break?
It won't, because there are quantum resistant algorithms that Bitcoin can fork out to with Bitcoin improvement protocols. Short and sweet is like that. Once again, use AI to verify what I say, right? Please go and verify what I say. Yeah.
Okay, another question coming in here. Will Jeremy support capital tax on Bitcoin?
I think capital tax in Singapore doesn't work. I just think in general, capital taxes in Singapore is not so good. We still need to attract a lot of capital in Singapore, but we must not shelter ourselves away from capital inflows. We just need to be very nifty in the way we manage capital inflows from each direction. Like the family office rules used to be 1 million and 5, then it became 5 million and 10, now it become 10 million and 50 or something like that. In other words, to put money in Singapore, right, to become registered family office, foreign family office. So no, I do not support a capital tax on Bitcoin. Redistribution is important in terms of having vouchers, but it should be done on things like your CDA, your child development account, your baby account, right? And then you're also, in what I propose, putting $10,000 in Bitcoin locked for the child until 21, because poor people don't have assets to compound, right? Lawrence Wong's administration is giving about $16,000 worth of goodies this year that will be spent entirely on necessities. But what we need is for these children that are born to have a peace of mind when they reach 21 to explore their life. What do they want to do? They can't do that if they don't have assets compounding for them.
Okay.
Yep.
So we've got a question here from Facebook, right, by Mr. PJ. He says, I don't...
Where is he?
Where is he? Yeah. So he says, I don't think that your numbers are quite right. Reserves in 2020 were approximately 1.35 trillion. In 2024, they were approximately 1.77 trillion. And the structural surplus for last year was 6 billion, right?
No, the disclosed official foreign reserves of US dollar and gold is 500 Sing dollars billion. We have estimations of what the true undisclosed reserves are at anything from 1.35 to 2.6 trillion. That is the numbers that I've heard, right? But on the MS website, I think the number of our US dollar and gold and foreign reserves is at 500 Sing billion as of 2024. I think that was right. Yeah, okay. So PJ, wherever you are, just want to let you know, that is how I got my source.
All right.
From the enemy themselves. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now we've got another question coming in from Jess Young on Facebook. They say, how confident are you about winning this election?
I think I'm at a good 45%, but it will really suck to lose at 45 to 49, because firstly they have okay, it's not related to me, right? They don't care about independence, maybe they redraw because, population shift, changes in trend, demo, whatever. But I really need to clear the 53, 55% mark in order for me to really step up for Mountbatten. Because we don't want, if I didn't step up, it was a walkover. I stay in Marine Parade, walk over. If I didn't step up here, walk over. It'd be damn sad.
Yeah.
Yep. So Marine Parade people who got walk over, join me tomorrow in my rally.
All right.
Yep.
So you put your odds at about the 45%.
45 I started with a low expectation of 30, 35, but because of so many professors that come out and help explain to me things, town council managers, even people working in the PA. And then I have whistleblowers, I have people who accuse this person and that person of that, all coming out to me. And I think that's what independent is best for, right? Because you get to process all these things and decide for your constituents what is the best way forward. So what are my chances? I think it gets higher the more people come up and support democracy, not just Mountbatten. Yeah.
Okay. Now we have time for one last live question, this one by Lance Yo on Facebook. And they say, how are you going to manage a town council, and where would you get the support if you won? Right. But
So-
basically the resources for running
Yeah,
a
so
town
there's
council.
so the town council thing has been overly used by PAP supporters against me. Firstly, the software used by the town council is a real bottleneck in creating better service. Okay, my first order of the day is to, when I do the handover takeover, I will rewrite the software for the ERP and the CRM. The second order of the day is to see how much we are paying for the next 24 months. We have cleaning contracts and garbage collection and mosquito contracts in Mountbatten, good for the next 24 months. Within the first 2 weeks, I'll make sure that we have tenders on our table. I've actually reached out to contract tenderers that lost all the previous bids.
Oh, okay.
I told them, business is open, guys. Come and rebid. So mosquito was about $48 per month per block for effective dwelling units of 62 HDBs. Because Mountbatten is a shorter flats because of Paya Lebar Air Base, we do not have the economies of scale for these types of contracts. But we can save money and improve service quality by rewriting replacing the Microsoft Dynamics software and the other software that's being used for property management in Mountbatten. Right? We want to achieve something like less than $11 per block per month for our cleaning. So that would translate to about 60 over 1,000, right? And we will do that for 36-month contracts. Okay, so I'm awaiting more contract tenderers to come back to me to offer a competitive bid, and we'll work from there. I'll hire a GM, and then we'll decide how many councillors. And right now, it should be about, RC should be about 9 people, the right ratio for my council. So I don't care if the PAP doesn't want to work with me. I want to work with them, but if they don't want to work with me, it's game on. I have more experience than my opponent right now in operating businesses and managing people. She wants to be a part-time MP, I want to be a full-time MP. I bootstrap my businesses, she has only worked for a law firm. All right, I respect Miss Goh, but she's a newcomer, and we're newcomers, and we have different ways of managing people, but I have managed more people than she could ever have managed. So I want to, and I have more technological experience and business experience in this case. Don't count me out just because I'm an independent. Just because I have not seen the town council way doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It would be a better thing because I know how to do things that's efficient. In the private sector, you do things efficiently. Otherwise, you don't get rewarded. That's the attitude I'll take going forward.
All right. Now, on that very, very strong note, I have to thank you so much, Jeremy, for dropping by and talking to us. And I also have to thank you, all of the viewers, for tuning in live on TOC. Right, so your support helps to make this work much more viable, right? Anyway, do remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're tuning in on YouTube, remember to ring that bell to be notified whenever we post new videos. So, thank you so much. We will see you again tomorrow.
Every election cycle in Singapore, one concern tends to surface among voters. Is my vote really secret? The elections department says yes, and the process is designed by law to ensure it. From the moment the polls open at 8 a.m., ballot boxes are sealed in full view of candidates and polling agents. After the polls close at 8 p.m., the slips are sealed, and agents may sign on the seals to ensure they have not been tampered with. These boxes are transported securely to counting centers, again observed by the counting agents. After counting, the ballot papers and official documents are sealed and stored in the vault of the Supreme Court for 6 months before being destroyed. All these steps are open for candidates and their counting agents to observe. It's a rigorous process. But what about the serial numbers? Yes, each ballot has a serial number, and your voter serial is recorded on a counterfoil when you're issued your ballot. This is meant to ensure accountability, to prevent counterfeit ballots or impersonation. But that link between you and your vote is sealed away. It can only be accessed with a court order, and only if there's solid evidence of electoral fraud that could have changed the outcome of the election. There is no practical or legal way for anyone to isolate and trace your single vote out of thousands, unless they're already trying to overturn the election. The idea that they know how you voted is a myth, built more on fear than fact. So where does this fear come from? The real issue isn't vote tracing. It's the perception of control, how the system feels stacked in favor of the ruling party. Because here's the truth. Singapore doesn't need to trace individual votes to maintain political dominance. The government already receives voting data by precinct and block. When entire clusters of HDB blocks vote a certain way, it becomes clear where support lies. And that's where gerrymandering comes in. Electoral boundaries are redrawn after each election. Whole constituencies disappear. New ones appear. Strongholds get split up. Weak zones get absorbed. That's not done through your one vote. It's done through pattern recognition. So yes, your vote is secret. But the system is still carefully managed. The real power isn't in tracing your vote. It's in shaping the field where your vote is cast. So don't let fear stop you from voting for the candidates you truly support in the election.